title because it does seem to sort of capture our situation with respect to thinking about the implications of global sea level rise and what would it actually be. But basically the class started when Ben asked the question of me, I think, I don't know, sometime last year. It's like, do you think, Martin, that we have the engineering and construction capacity to deal with rising sea levels around the world when we have struggled to deal with just fairly isolated disasters? And they have sort of exhausted our engineering and construction resources just in some localized places. What would it be like if actually things changed all over the world? Maybe we should think about it. Ben will give a little bit more background. But that was basically the genesis of the project. We felt that a really good way of finding out about something is to work with the marvelous students we have here at Stanford, which is what we had the pleasure to be able to do over the last 7 months or so. And basically today we present you the status of our project. So let me introduce some of the students that have been with us for the whole year or have spent this quarter with us. One is Nathan Chase. He, as a week ago, was going to be here, but then got the opportunity to travel to Bogota with Jenna Davis and spending a few days in Colombia for being here. But I asked each of the students to come up with sort of something that struck them from this experience. And one thing that he found is that just a little bit of research, a little bit of input from us, doing a very conceptual design, sort of got him hooked, and he really wanted to find out more about it and get to the bottom of it. Newell, freshman, joined us last autumn. So do you want to summarize what you
Yeah, just a couple quick notes about my results. I was more on the construction capacity and the data side, and we found that we're going to have some severe gravel shortages. And for example, in China and India, it's 50 or 65 years of all of the gravel currently produced just built some of these defenses.
It gives you an idea of the kind of, we wanted to find out roughly where are we at with respect to the challenges in our face. And then Vivian Chua worked on this project this quarter. You want to maybe say what you're doing here at Stanford?
Yeah, so I'm doing a PhD in EFMH and I'm studying San Francisco Bay. So I use this opportunity to create to model the sea level rise in San Francisco Bay and probably implement it in my thesis.
So let Ben introduce a little bit more motivation for the project.
Okay.
Take us through some of the approaches, and I'll jump in as needed.
Okay, sir. Okay. Sure. At any time. You don't need an invitation. So the genesis of this project for me came from my other job at Walt Disney. And we're very, we do an enormous amount of construction, close to $1 billion a year. So that's not a huge amount of construction compared to the world capacity, but it's enough that the cost of that is quite important to us. So what we realized was we looked at Hurricane Katrina and the results of Hurricane Katrina, and we realized that that U.S. domestic construction prices went up as a result of that. That was the genesis that Martin mentioned. We realized that if we wanted to do Katrina-scale projects across the U.S., I really questioned whether or not we would be able to do so. Likewise, we looked at some of our sites. We have sites at sea level in Tokyo and in Hong Kong, and a couple of the other areas that we're looking at. So we felt that we really should get a handle on this. And in fact, as I'm sure Meg knows as well as anyone here, half the world population lives very close to the coast. Most of the growth of the world's population is going to be in coastal areas, and the seaborne trade is absolutely enormous. So we really needed to, we felt we had to get a handle on what the potential sea level change might be. And basically we wanted to look at a level of sea level change that we felt virtually every port would have to do something. So the IPCC's estimates do not include any change in sea level due to melting terrestrial ice caps. As you probably know, if you melt sea ice, it doesn't really change the level of sea. But on the other hand, if glacial ice that is on land melts, then it does have the potential. So there's been a lot of wildly exaggerated claims of enormous sea level changes, but we wanted to pick one that was sort of the minimum level at which we felt everyone would have to do something. And that was the genesis of the 2 meters, 2 meter sea level change we felt. And plus, it's not an unreasonable amount. That represents a relatively small fraction of the Greenland ice cap melting. And as I'm sure you know, the rate of change of sea level has accelerated substantially, even though we're still in the millimeter range per year. It's accelerated quite a bit in the last 5 years. So, this little statement at the bottom that the IPCC's model does not include future dynamical changes in ice flow is a very conservative kind of statement from the IPCC. So, just I mentioned natural disasters. The scale of these disasters is really substantial, and the response of the construction industry is really deep and profound and wide, and includes every part of it. It includes the design, it includes material, it includes people, it includes investment, it includes across the board in the construction industry. Virtually every resource of the construction industry is mobilized to respond to these kinds of disasters. We envision a comparable type of response for the case where every port in the world essentially would have to construct some type of coastal defense.
Excuse me, how does the construction industry's overview response in terms of trade subsidies, municipal, very government? Is it better? Do they have a better handle on all aspects of their various in terms of what needs to be done?
For this particular problem?
Yeah, for this particular problem. Better in government?
I'm afraid you're looking at it. I meet regularly. I'm on the board of directors of the Civil Engineering Research, one of the groups in the American Society of Civil Engineers, so I spend a lot of time back there.
They're very sensitive.
They're not thinking about it.
They're not thinking about it.
They're not thinking about it. This is to stimulate a debate whereby the engineering community, and most importantly, the investment community, is going to get some idea of what the type of resources are needed. Because when you start to realize the types of shortages, one of the first things that we concluded is focusing just on the construction industry, there will be an enormous demand for investment to increase the capacity. What we wanted to do, we realized, in order to make some sense of this whole problem, we would take, in broad brush, we would come up with a sort of a minimum reasonable design criteria, and then quantify what it would take to build that sort of minimum reasonable design for coastal protection, and compare that to our best estimate of the total capacity, total industrial capacity of the design and construction industry. And that we would do that comparison by way of our 4D models that we developed partly at Disney and mostly here at the Center for Integrated Facilities Engineering. And then, of course, compare that to what's needed, and ultimately we'd love to be able to make some kind of a statement about what level of investment is going to be necessary to increase the capacity so that we can deal with it. A second question, which is as important or more important, is answering the question from the developers, a notion of engineering policy, because right now there's no such thing really as engineering policy, and the question of should we be doing this is, we think, an equally important question. And how do we decide? Those are all questions which, at least in the last 150 years, engineers have been sort of backing away from. We really think that this is one instance where we need to take a broader, have a broader participation in that debate, because there's nothing to clarify the mind like some factual, or in this case, model-based facts or simulation. So the design and construction industry capacity, strangely enough, the government does not collect productivity data on the design and construction industry. They will do so in the starting next year. That's in large part due to the influence of the work that was done here at SIFI, Paul Dykold, Martin, myself. We've lobbied long and hard to get the U.S. government to collect productivity measures.
Oh, they're going to collect which agencies?
Department of Commerce, somewhere in the Department of Commerce.
Some
Same thing we're doing for correct, because for every industry has a standard industrial codes, and there are new numbers of quite a few of them, I guess, for the design and construction industry. We're going to look at aggregating those. We're going to help them understand. So there's a group at the American Society of Civil Engineers who's going to attempt to tackle that. I mentioned before that natural disasters can cause some significant impacts. There's no official statistics for the U.S. The situation is even worse internationally. Global data is very hard to come by. Trade associations do their best. Quite honestly, some of our best insight and information has come from the global engineering companies, in particular from Bechtel, where we have a lot of contacts with Bechtel and a couple of the other big engineering companies. And again, one of the big issues I think that everyone is concerned with is what we sort of look at as double counting. So every port in the western U.S. says, oh, we're going to do the dredging, but they all are counting on the same small number of dredges. So those dredges are going from Seattle to San Francisco to L.A. And so everybody assumes that that dredge will be there, but in fact, we share it. And there are some anecdotal evidence of that already. Some major fraction of the world's construction tower cranes are in the Middle East right now, in Dubai in particular. So believe it or not, these resources are very mobile and move everywhere, and everyone winds up using the same one. So that's one of the early findings of this.
I mean, one of our graduates, just to illustrate, even today, right, one of our graduates visited me a couple months ago, and he works for a contractor in Indonesia. And he said, if you have any links to any bulldozer or scraper or any piece of construction equipment, I'll buy it before I It's not finding it even today.
And one of the other things that's been really interesting, one of the critical resources that we've learned from our colleagues in the Netherlands is the construction of ships. So major coastal infrastructure requires the use of purpose-built ships. So the ship construction industry in the United States, in particular North America in general, is a tiny, tiny fraction of what it was 40 or 50 years ago. So the major shipbuilding industry in the world today is located in Europe and in Asia. So very, very small amount of shipbuilding capacity. And if we wish to design more elegant structures, more heavily engineered structures, you move away from the sort of the bulk coastal dike and levee construction and into steel, concrete, and things like that, and those will require the construction of ships. So, and the world's capacity for constructing those ships is not, we think, what will be necessary. So I mentioned this concept of the minimum reasonable design. And we came up with a couple different approaches. We're using basically one, which David will walk you through. Cost data reflective of those regional conditions, which I was just mentioning. And then again, to compare the design and scope of global data on all the factors which influence the design and construction industry. I mentioned here dikes, levees, and landfill for port surfaces. Clearly, the ports don't like the idea of constructing locks, which is, of course, sort of the brute force method. They're enormously complicated. They pose a huge variety of environmental problems because you reduce the water exchange. You know, we're looking at the construction of locks simply because, from a speed of construction point of view, one of the ideas that occurred to us is that's the fastest way to get the job done. Otherwise, you're talking about raising the overall level of these ports, which are many square miles in most cases, and have all of the rail and infrastructure that you need there. So the point is, we will present to you the data that we have in the hopes of sparking the debate about what should be done, if it should be done, and how it should be done.
And in some ways, you chose on purpose kind of the most basic design, because when we know it will work, and if you wanted to build it, you know how to build it. It has proven itself in many ways, and so it would get the job done. And we know that in most places we could probably do better, but we still wanted to see where do we stand with a method that we will go over. Because everything else is just incredibly more time consuming, because you have to make a very site-specific design, which in reality we'll probably have to do, but we still want to establish kind of a bound of the problem issues.
We haven't really addressed the sort of demands on the engineering community. There probably aren't enough coastal engineering firms in the world to do the designs. If you wanted to design a purpose-built, really elegant design for all the ports, requires an enormous investment in data. You're going to be doing drillings and borings and all sorts of engineering information that you need to design an elegant structure. That takes quite a substantial amount of time, let alone the actual design itself. So, we chose to look exclusively at ports rather than all the other coastal communities, in large part because the ports have a fixed infrastructure that can't be moved. When you wanted to do something sophisticated like look at a cost-benefit ratio, one of the issues for looking at, say, for example, residential development near the coast is cost-benefit means something that's on a very slippery scale, if you will. The minute that you think your house is going to be underwater, the value of that house is going to drop. Whereas for a port, you can come up with a different kind of a metric which we've been tossing around, which is sort of like a cost-value ratio as opposed to a cost-benefit, in the sense that we can say, this is the value of all the goods and services that run through this port. This is what it means to the regional economy, and it's a little bit less, or I should say more tractable to the kind of analysis that we're looking at here, rather than looking at, say, particularly in the case of North America, something most people can relate to here, coastal communities and residential communities. Obviously, the situation would be considerably different in the rest of the world, particularly in the developed. But we're focusing on the ports, largely because of the fixed infrastructure, largely because of the high economic value. Also, it's a clear baseline. They have really defined geographic boundaries. There's data, there are data available from them, and it's an enormously simplifying assumption, because this is a very, very complicated problem, as we found out as we plunged into it.
But again, we wanted to sort of establish a first stake in the ground and say, okay, if we don't even protect the ports, then we really have a problem.
Right.
And we all have to do much more, or we'll have to find a way to deal with much more. But then we want to find a place to mitigate and think it's all.
Yeah, and I can say, typically a project like this, at this level of estimation and of design, is something that makes most engineers cringe, because it's not a real design. One of the basics of engineering is that you design a structure for a specific location, for a specific set of design circumstances, and that's the correct way to do engineering. We realize that that's the correct way to do engineering. This, of course, is at a level of abstraction that is considerably less than what you would do. However, because of the nature of the problem, we think that it's worth it to suffer the questions and commentary and criticism that we would justifiably get from the engineering community for tackling a project of this magnitude.
So we decided on just 177 ports because we figured that the most important ports are going to have the highest value in terms of the amount of shipping that goes through, either in tonnage or in containers or in 20-foot equivalent units. And then we also looked at ports that have greater than 1 million people living in the vicinity of these ports. And those turn out to be on 6 continents, and it comes out to 177 ports.
Yeah, Yeah, so just for example, the million people criterion up there allows us to include a port like Auckland. Otherwise, the port of Auckland, otherwise New Zealand would have no ports under consideration at all.
And most of Africa wouldn't have very many at all. And
That didn't seem to be rational.
exactly. One of the things that Nathan Chase developed over the course of the last 2 quarters was a methodology for case studies. And basically he outlined that we need to evaluate the different ports, exactly what the procedure is for it, and then using our tools, which is basically a massive Excel spreadsheet, to input all the data and get a response out. So now I'll go into more of our current status and sort of working how this methodology occurred over the course of the last year. We have port characteristics data, which is a set of the shipping value, some of the environmental data, bathymetry, and just raw length of how long it is that we have to protect. In some places we have tidal characteristics, and we've imported all of this into Google Earth into a layer that looks like this. And when you open up the balloon, it has all of our data in the spreadsheet easily displayed. And then you can zoom in on these ports, and we also have where we've measured for most of the ports. We can show an orange line where we think the defense would go.
Is that just using the mind map function or are you
Almost. What we actually did was hard-coded the fuel markup language, it's a type of XML, to export directly into a file that we can just open in Google.
This has really cool applications for other disciplines. I mean, we have
Yes.
diver students interested in mapping cultural
Right.
information.
Well, in fact, there's a stupefying amount of stuff that's already up there doing exactly that. You can go to Google Earth, and I'm sure you've seen the Darfur, for example.
Yes.
I haven't gone to that.
Every single conflict site is.
I've heard that.
That's a fantastic data set.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we had a student in winter quarter, Mike Dvorak. He's really good with GIS modeling, so he helped us develop a model that he used the GRASS GIS system to automatically determine the protection length and the average protection height or depth using a bathymetry data set, which would output usually a ring around a port, such as Galveston in this case. And the only issue we've had with this is that we probably wouldn't actually build the defense for the port over the land. So that throws off the protection height somewhat. And that brings us into slides.
The point of this was, if you're looking at 3,000, a database of 3,000 ports, it's not really feasible to go and come up with a hand-drawn engineering design for all 3,000. We felt that we could come up with an automated solution that would get us our first order of magnitude approximation, that could be really useful. So this is our first pass at that first order approximation.
Exactly. So we took all of these numbers that we got from the GIS model and from the other various data sets and the port characteristics, and matched them up with the cost and availability capacity data for most of the world. We're missing some in Africa and like, for example, New Zealand.
What's RS mean source?
The RS means, it's a big directory.
That's an organization that compiles construction costs in the U.S.
So if you're a civil engineer, you want to estimate your project, you go to this and they will tell you how many hours it takes per cubic meter of road surface and things like that.
And then we got mostly capacity data from the UN. They had some good cement, sand, and gravel data, which from talking with Bechtel, we found that concrete, particularly the aggregate for concrete, is one of the most limiting resources worldwide. And then we compared that data for a few locations with Country Watch and kind of confirmed that it was pretty accurate. And in that case, we took pretty much the last 10 years of data and just took the maximum data point, because that would most likely be near the maximum capacity of the industry in that nation.
Because as you mentioned before, it was difficult to find capacity information on the industry, so we said, well, but most regions in the world had a couple good years in the last decade. And so if we take the maximum output of a given year, we can assume that everybody was working as hard as they possibly could. If they could have sold another ton of cement, if they had it, they would have sold it, because everybody was just working full tilt. So that's the number we took as capacity. And so what went into it was, of course, from so that the GIS model and from some places where we did things manually, length and depth of the protection structure that would be needed. So we had an idea of the demand, and now matching it up with what would be supplied in the various parts of the world.
I just wanted to talk just a little bit about the sand and gravel and aggregate. It seems kind of surprising that in an era of high-tech construction, a resource like gravel would wind up being in short supply. It's not, I'll say, just gravel, because that is what forms the structural basis. So it has to be washed, it has to be cleaned, it has to be graded, it has to be sized. It's not the case that you can just scoop it up from any old place, right? Because particularly if there's a substantial amount of organic material, say for example, which is what you find if you're dredging. So in many places of the world, particularly in Southeast Asia, you have to travel very long distances just to get the type of sand that you need. For example, Singapore, you're talking a minimum of 100 kilometers and frequently 200 kilometers. So to get the sand, just something like sand, washed and cleaned and transported so you can do the landfill.
When I just came back from Qatar, and they said they
Qatar.
have shortages of sand.
They have shortages
For
of
construction, which is ironic, but it's washed sand, right? It's sand suitable for construction.
In the Mediterranean, real problem. Well, one hang-up with the early contact for marine production in the Mediterranean was, no, you can't dredge for sand and gravel.
Yeah.
No, sure, that was like, very good. That was a long time ago.
Okay. You get to kind of a, and then similar, integrating all of that data is a coastal protection design tool, which again is just a spreadsheet, which takes into account building an offshore dike, a lock, a pump station, and doing maintenance dredging inside the port. And basically, the design is we put a dike in with a lock through it, and then some of the things we had to take into account were wave overtopping and scouring for the open ocean side of the dike. And then from inside the port, if there's a river, if you have a storm upriver, it's going to, all that water is going to come down, and now it's trapped and can't go to the open ocean. So we had to put in a pump station to get all that water out, because it couldn't just flow straight out, especially if the sea level is already higher than the basin inside the port. You would just be negating the effects of putting in the dike if you don't get that water out. And then from the river, you would also have silt and other sediment that you inevitably have to dredge out to keep it deep enough for the ships to go in and out.
And that is the most brute force, but simple, engineering design. It's quite clear what you've done and why you did it. There's two basic conditions that coastal engineers are concerned with. One are areas with a relatively shallow coastal plain, where you have the potential for tsunami kind of waves, which is a substantial amount of high velocity water motion. And the other is areas with steep coastal shelves, where you have basically impact forces from different environments, different design, but in gross, those are the two major types of conditions that against which you would design.
So we took all our coastal protection design tool and applied it to Long Beach Harbor in two different designs. One a manual design and the other a model design using that GIS model. So by hand we found this would be 10.5 miles long, right along the kind of just in front of the current breakwater. Whereas the model found it to be a little bit shorter at 10 miles long. And then we used some estuarine bathymetry from NOAA to collect that it would be about 25 meters deep at that location. And the GIS model returned 9 meters high. And how that impacted our costs was roughly $1.7 billion for the model, for the manual design versus around $700 million for the model design. And the manual design would take about twice as long to construct, at a little more than 20 years versus around 10 years. And what we have here down on the bottom below the picture of Long Beach Harbor is a SketchUp model that shows the basic design of the dike, just having a very gently sloped side toward the ocean and a much steeper to the port side of construction.
And this is a condition where you would have impact because the coastal shelf, continental shelf, is quite steep in this part of along western Europe. It's actually there is a substantial tsunami risk in Southern California, due mostly to the potential for offshore slides to this big cliff about 4 or 5 miles offshore, which if it decides to let go, places a substantial part of Orange County at a tsunami risk.
And I'll hand it over to Vivian.
Okay. So for the case study of San Francisco Bay, I created a hydrodynamic model to understand the impacts of 1 meter sea level rise and also the possibility of constructing a barrage at Golden Gate. So San Francisco Bay is important to us. It's a major port. It's a main commercial center. There's like 9 million people living in the Bay, and the Bay also has a diverse ecosystem. So the Bay consists of the 4 embayments: Suisun Bay, San Pablo Bay, Central Bay, and South Bay. Tides enter the Bay through Golden Gate, and there's freshwater inflow from the Delta region. Delta drains a watershed about 40% of the land area of California. It provides fresh water to the Bay, and also diverts fresh water. So sea level record has been measured at Golden Gate since 1910, and the record shows that for the past 100 years, sea level has been rising at Golden Gate. And because of global warming, this sea level rise is likely to accelerate as well. In fact, models have predicted that sea level rise at Golden Gate would be 1 meters by 2100. In addition to the sea level rise, El Nino events are also likely to increase with global warming, and this El Nino events bring extreme storm events into the Bay, and we recall from the storms, I think in 1998 or something, there was really bad disastrous flooding in the Bay. So the areas at risk in San Francisco Bay, this was done with GIS modeling as well as 2D hydrodynamic modeling, and we identified certain areas in Central Bay, South Bay, as well as the northern reach that would be flooded just with a 1 meter sea level rise. So where we're staying right now, Palo Alto would also be affected, as well as different areas, Alameda, Hayward, Fremont, in the Central Bay, Oakland airports, San Francisco airports, in the northern reach, Colorado, Madera, and then also parts of the Delta areas would be flooded. So the 2D model was created with SunTens, which stands for standard unstructured, no hydrostatic rainfall, adaptive near software. So the domain I created extends from the ocean boundary of the Pacific Ocean all the way up into the Delta region. The Delta is modeled by 2 rectangles representing the Sacramento and San Joaquin reverse. So the ocean boundary is forced by tides from Golden Gate, and the delta has freshwater inflow from data taken from Nick flow, which is a program that generates the freshwater stream. So I use bathymetry from NOAA sources and USGS to generate the grid as well. Where the regions are deeper, we have larger cells, and where it's shallower, the cells are actually made smaller. The range of the grid cells in the bay is between 400 to 500 meters for this current resolution. Tides are calibrated. The model is calibrated with tides at Golden Gate. So the printed model results are compared with observations from NOAA. And we see here on the top plot that the observations and model looks pretty good, indicating that we can use this model for the observations. And at Golden Gate, with 1 meter sea level rise, the tides actually increase by 1 meter. It's not surprising over here, but okay, so this picture here is actually created with the summations, and even though the tides at Golden Gate show that it's just 1 meter sea level rise, nothing interesting going on, but the currents increase almost 2 times at Golden Gate with the sea level rise. This has a lot of implications for the bay because it will change circulation patterns in the bay, it will increase tide exchange between the bay and the ocean, and also the flushing of pollutants or nutrients from the bay into the ocean will increase. We expect water quality to decrease, and habitats in the bay will disappear, or it'll create new habitats because more seawater will enter the bay, and this makes environments that are currently brackish to be really saline environments, and also the ecosystems, the species that live there can no longer live there, so we can expect species close to Golden Gate to move up into the delta region. There will be modifications to sediment distributions because salt currents in South Bay will be eroded, and also there's a greater tide exchange between the bay and ocean. And the current levee systems in the bay actually is not able to cope with this increase. So if we do nothing, we can expect almost $48 billion worth of property infrastructure in the bay to be at risk. As I mentioned previously in my previous slide, that the salt horns and tidal marshes would be submerged. Salt horns in the South Bay area, in this region, and tidal marshes here, from the simulations actually showed that sea level would rise to 0.9 meters in the South Bay and 0.5 meters at the tidal marshes in the North Bay. And because the average depth of this area is only 0.1 meters, we can definitely expect these areas to go in the water. So what could we do? One suggestion is to build a partial intrusion barrage at Golden Gate. So this barrage will be able to regulate flow of seawater entering and leaving the bay. This would minimize impacts to the hydrodynamics, water quality, and ecosystems in the bay. If we just do nothing, we expect, like as I say in my previous slide, a lot of the changes will occur. But if we build a barrage there, we will minimize the impact because the currents at the barrage we could regulate to be about 1.24 meters per second, which is what is currently measured in the day. And in the straight calculus, straight 0.5 meters per second, and then in flow with mesh current conditions as well. The only thing that we can change with a barrage there is the leap stream variability and diurnal variability of tides in the bay. So could we use this barrage to generate tidal power? Even though currently at this current status, it seems that Golden Gate is not ideal to generate tidal power because the speeds of currents there are only about 2 meters per second, and in general you only want to generate tidal power in locations where current speeds are more than 4 meters per second. And my simulation actually shows that because of this increase in current speeds, a tidal barrage at Golden Gate is definitely more feasible now. And just an estimate of tidal power at Golden Gate using this equation here by modifying the density of seawater, flow rate, gravity, and tidal amplitude. We found that in a neat spring cycle, the maximum flow rate is estimated to be about 5,000 meters cubed per second, the maximum height about 2 meters, and the maximum power generated is 1 × 10⁸ watts, which is, I think, pretty good compared to current conditions. And now, I'll pass it over.
Okay, and I'll get into some of our current results that we have right now as a data. So for the purposes, that's interesting, the title didn't show it again. But for the purposes of these results, we split up all of our reports into sub-regions. For example, North America, which is mainly the U.S. and Canada, South America, Australia, New Zealand, China, Korea. And all of these little red dots here are the reports we've chosen to look at. So measuring our results, we looked at a time to construct, which came right out of the Coastal Protector tool. And in this case, we looked at unconstrained, which means we could just build them all right away. Doesn't matter if the materials are limited or if we have to take some time to get the money, because it just takes a certain amount of time to put the material into place. Then we also looked at being constrained by materials, which is taking this unconstrained and then adding time to amass all the materials. And then we looked also at constrained by resources, which is sort of like a capacity, which we compared the current dollar value of construction output and looked at the fraction of that these particular defenses would cost. And then we created a 40 month.
That's in large part to get to the issue of the fact that we don't collect good data in the world for all those other resources, like the ships and construction workers and dredges and barges and all that stuff. So it's an aggregated measure. Not perfect, but it's the best it's
And then we created a sort of conceptual 4D model in Google Earth, and in the time to construct we compare all 4 of these metrics to see how they relate to each other. And then we also looked at materials. We looked at the raw amount of cement, gravel, and sand required, and then also the relative amount of those 3 materials compared to the current production capacity. So, and from that we can determine numbers such as the striking result that how many years it will take of using all of the current capacity to construct the defenses. Then we looked at just the raw cost, and the best metric we came up with here is the marginal cost per shipping unit in terms of metric tons, containers, and for the Middle East, we looked at barrels of oil. So I'll get into some of our graphs. A distribution of construction duration per year just gives us an idea of the number of ports and how long the relatively takes. So the Mediterranean has a lot of smaller ports that will only take a couple of years to construct, high at 16, whereas the Middle East, right here in the middle, has more of a variety of different projects, so it'll take a lot longer. Moving on to, this is comparing the 4 metrics of time to construct. The unconstrained is the top shortest bar, and the capacity constrained is adding in the fraction of the construction industry, which really we found does not have a significant impact except in Australia and New Zealand where it's several years worth of construction. Otherwise, the rest of the world, it's not necessarily too much of the capacity. Whereas with the materials, we found that it's going to take a lot longer to amass these materials, is how we assumed in this model. And then our 4D model are the longest bars, which take into account that you can only construct a certain number of these at one time, and then potentially increasing that capacity going from 1 to 2 ports every year, or 2 ports at a time, and then sequencing those out and scheduling to make some sense of how long it could potentially take. So then into the supply of the materials. This is the current supply, percentage of the current supply. The current supply is right at 100%. So above there we have, we require more material than we are currently producing. Below, it's just going to take up a significant amount of that year's production. And this is where we get, for India, we're up over 6,400%. This is a logarithmic scale. And so from that we can get 64 years of gravel required to build the defenses in India.
And that's a place we have millions of people living on lowland and river deltas and so on.
Yes. So the total material demand by region is just the millions of metric tons of material required, which just shows you that North America is going to use a lot of gravel, over nearly 8.5 million metric tons to build all these defenses. And this is just showing the average length of the defenses per port by region. So the Middle East has the longest average defenses. They just have the longest sea line, the largest ports in terms of area, with the greatest perimeter that we have to protect. And what's interesting is that North America requires a lot more material, but the average defense length is shorter. And then going to the next one, North America has a lot more in terms of the amount of material needed per meter of length, so they're deeper in this case. So this is just the amount of material per linear meter, so just taking a slice out. And then moving into the cost metric. This is the cost of construction per shipping unit per year. So just taking 1 year's shipping value in terms of containers in red, metric tons in yellow, and the barrels of crude oil, assuming that all of the Middle East's shipping in metric tons were oil, it would affect, the marginal cost would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.50 per barrel of oil, just to build the defenses for the Middle East.
But that's at today's prices.
That's at today's prices.
Not considering the demand, the increased demand, and what that might do to prices.
Exactly. And the particularly interesting thing for this is that if you take the $32 per metric ton in the Middle East, that would be just a few, like 32 cents per kilogram moving through each of the ports. So that you could probably pick up from a tax or something. So now I'm going to move into a Google Earth demonstration.
One of the interesting things that we learned as part of this is that a great many of the ports are actually privately owned and operated, even though they serve a public resource. So incentivizing the owners and operators of the ports to invest is, again, kind of outside the scope of what we actually study, but by the same token is another one of those critical policy kinds of issues.
Well, let's fly over Rotterdam. One of the interesting things about Rotterdam is that it's a very large port that is right on the Rhine River. So there we go. And so if we look at it, you've got the Rhine River coming right along the exit of the port. And in the case of a storm event, the Dutch have built these fantastic swinging gates that close in the event of river flooding and things like that. And someone has built a very nice 3D model of this, these swinging gates, which you can see here. Just an idea of some of the things we could do with Google Earth in the future. And then to give an idea of what Vivian was talking about, I'll fly over to San Francisco Bay. And then we'll just fly into the Golden Gate briefly. Downtown right here. There's a very nice model of the Golden Gate Bridge in here. There it is. And I think think Vivian was suggesting the tidal barrage would be sort of right near the bridge. And then we can go down to only construct a certain number of these at the Long Beach Harbor and Los Angeles Harbor. And these little port icons here are our port characteristics, which this is how it displays with a little diagram of what the dike would look like with some fill, a toe, and then the outline of the dike. And then, I have to turn that. Andrew Peterman at Walt Disney Imagineering built a proof of concept SketchUp model to show the dike for San Pedro Bay. And you just fly down to the model. It comes along just in front of breakwater, as in our manual design for the case study. And unfortunately, right now, Google Earth does not have any bathymetry data, and you can't position models subsurface. So this would be just what's above the water. Right around the water.
It's because it's still Google Dirt,
It's
Google
Google
Earth.
water.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
right,
yeah.
exactly.
Google Land.
It's not yet Google Land.
Yeah.
But you can see at least the cross section and the height above you can see the whole height of whatever the water happens.
They are going to be adding all of that imagery though.
Soon, hopefully.
Yeah.
They've been working on that. And then a couple other things I can show you that we've created are, in addition to these port characteristics, we have polygons for a few ports that we do it, where the red one is just roughly the port, where the port infrastructure is, just the area it is. And then just for a couple ports, we have what the basin would look like in blue. What the new sort of lake formed by the dike inside of it.
The other thing, you can use it on the land side, obviously, if you wanted to go in and raise all the area that's there by a couple meters.
Yeah, we raised this entire red area up like 2 meters, and we can measure that area and calculate how much dirt, which we found just doing a quick calculation for Los Angeles and Long Beach, was vastly greater than the amount of material we would just build a dike. And then we have the proposed defenses I mentioned that we drew in by hand. And then from the GIS model, there's a red ring right here. Oh, there it is. Right there, to show you just how that was roughly a little bit off, but the length still matched up pretty well. And then the last thing to show you is our concept 4D model. I'll zoom out to show the entire U.S. and some of Canada's. And in this case, the 4D model is white, means nothing has been done yet. When they turn to red, that means they are in the design phase. Yellow is the construction phase, and green means that they are complete. And then along here on the side, we have the little metrics. They'll load the first time through, and then next time it will be much smoother. That show for the Middle East, China, Korea, Mediterranean, and North America, how many of the ports are completed. It's just like a speedometer.
We basically assumed that we would be able to do a small number of the total per region per year simultaneously. And then that's how we came up. If you look at the sliding bar at the very top, that's the
It
years.
says the year.
So when you get to the end,
It's at 2175, starting in 2010.
So it's not,
year 2175, that's for the 177
you can slow it down.
major ports.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not,
It's not right in the other.
yeah, out of the
So you-
total 3,000.
Yeah. So it's still pretty quick for the North America. It finishes in 2075, around there. But you can see if we can go over to China and Korea, how it takes them a little bit longer because now we're getting into 2100 right there, and then they're done right around 2100. And this scrolls over the entire area.
All of this has just come together, as you can imagine, so we're still kind of digesting things, which we will continue to do over the next weeks. Our goal is to see if we can write sort of the first article on publication on what we found today in the method. We have started to explore collaborations in Netherlands, India, also Japan, a number of places around the world where people could help us validate some of the capacity data, but also look at the particular conditions of the ports and just the assumptions we've made to regionalize, localize our assumptions and our designs. So we are exploring how we can work with them over the next 12 months or so to deepen the study. We were awarded some funding to plan an effort here at Stanford through the Sustainable Built Environment Initiative in the context of the Woods Institute of Environment. Ben, Meg, Jack, and a few other of our colleagues all of that, so we'll have to stick our heads together over the summer a few times and see how we expand this into a little bit more multidisciplinary study. And I mentioned the article, and also plan to make the Google Earth data available. Maybe we can have some kind of fault protector wiki community coming up.
Mark, what kind of journals are you planning on submitting these to? Engineering journals or climate change journals or human dimensions type thing? There's different kind of journals.
Well, we're looking at a general interest journal, and we think that, in fact, we're thinking a major journal like
What about
science.
science?
Like science.
Science would be great.
It would be a great place because it is, not because it's so, it's the right venue for science, it's the right
Science
level of
has
generality.
had things like sustainability, science and all of it. Doesn't mean it does. It's really substantive.
Yeah.
Very
So that's our first target because that will get a very broad exposure. And if we want to get, if the goal is, well, in fact, the goal is to engage a wider audience, to make the tools available for them. And that's a great way to get us at the level where people will pay attention. So that's our target for the first
150,000 subscribers.
Yeah, it's a fairly good one. So we were hoping to get that probably by the end of the summer.
Yeah.
We have an outline already.
Great.
There are some issues.
How useful were all the planning and the engineering studies for the Venice one and the Shida were they considered all of the sea level rise for Venice engineering and that's for years they studied it.
Right. Well,
Was there any relevance to what you were saying?
there is relevance, not to this level of this level is focusing on strictly on the construction part of it.
Okay.
Most of, if I remember correctly, most of the Venice work has been CFD models
Yes.
on tidal exchange and pollution.
Yeah.
Right? That's a whole area where Vivian is the first person on our team to really take a look at it. We know it's a huge issue,
Yeah.
but that's we're not even to the level of that.
I mean, this opens the whole kind of world of the environmental and social but things
Oh, they
that
are.
I'm keeping my mouth shut.
we haven't, we are very, we know very well, we know very well that we have not,
That's 2,000 years.
we have not touched, and in my mind, that's going to be part of our planning for the next study.
We're really interested to work with the Dutch, having had that water in the 12th century. And it's so sensitive. Really fascinating work.
We are working with them already. I mean,
We were the core people are,
That's correct.
Our Ministry of Water.
the TTNO and the Technical University of Delft are the main places.
Delta's the greatest place.
Yeah, we are working also with another colleague from Caltech,
Yeah.
coastal engineer at Caltech. And they've all been big helps. And quite honestly, one of the biggest challenges is to get our engineering colleagues to take a deep breath and say, okay, this isn't the way we usually do it, but this is a different problem. So, and for the Dutch in particular, because
How the Dutch are more open-minded about it?
not particularly, the Dutch are so far ahead of us. Their major concern now is planning for evacuation and inundation, and there's a number of people that they say, look, if you live here, you have 4 hours. They're looking at refugia, so when they know that the dike will break, their design criteria is the 10,000-year storm, just to give you a sense of scale. But even with the 10,000-year storm, they have the concept of refugia, so everybody knows that these are the places when the levee breaks, your goal is to get to here. So they know that they won't be able to evacuate people. They're so far beyond planning for evacuations. They take it quite seriously.
Yeah, yes, they have for a long time.
So just to wrap up formally here, we are considering making this a little bit more formal class in the fall, and Steve Smith suggested that we should maybe a partnership between the construction and the coastal faculty here, where we would take, where students would develop some of the case studies in particular parts using our method. We have started to explore how we could work with students at the Technical University of Delft and IIT Chennai, possibly in other places, but those two have already expressed enthusiasm. So we can kind of deepen our study this way. So we want to thank a number of people, other students that helped us throughout the year, and others in industry and academia that have provided significant help to this study so far. So, thank you.
Very nice.
So what's your quick reaction?
Meg, are you ready?
Holy shit.
That's good reaction.
Yeah, well, some of those harbors that you've already identified are really important ecological systems. And trying to cope with that, at the same time that you're coping with the physical disruptions.
It's just getting your head around the problem. And I think one of the reasons that I'm really glad that you're here is there is no mechanism, right? I mean, no political, social mechanism to deal with something like this that I really know of. I mean,
No, I mean, and we've
back
got,
up and it's going to be economic.
we've got the reverse mechanism going on now with dam removal. Right? So it's really interesting to have this happening, thinking about this at the same time.
Do you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned how the Dutch are looking ahead to evacuation sort of research, I guess, and figuring out how that element of dealing with these vulnerabilities, but is that happening in the U.S. at all? I mean, if these things aren't built in time, then we're going to be having to...
Yeah, at least I haven't seen that level of thinking. Like, I mean, the entire Netherlands is broken up into 4 types of zones that are designed. They have protections for different level storms. And
Yeah, Europe is so far ahead of us.
FEMA,
Adaptation.
the mechanism in the U.S. is FEMA flood maps. basically, that's the mechanism, and your ability to buy insurance if you're in one of the FEMA.
Flood zones, yeah.
That's right, there's the V zone,
Yeah.
which is the worst one of all, where the coastal, shallow coastal thing.
We're in water kind of small, right, so the creek does not necessarily. So, right.
So the mechanism in the U.S., quite honestly, is economics driven largely by your ability to buy insurance.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask a question for someone in engineering? This is probably a stupid question, but in countries where like Australia, I noticed that we don't have cement and gravel, we're very much low and we so it costs us the most to build, we're actually the highest up with one of them. What's the potential for when we've got water crisis? We've actually don't have enough water, so we're drought, and what we are looking at desalination and water goes down enough, and that's going to cause all sorts of problems. It's not going to coal-fired power stations to produce that. But in any event, my question was about where the potential is to create channels. I mean, it's not possible in Europe, but actually to have, to actually create rivers, if you like, into the countries to take some, the rising sea level. Is there not potential for, channels to be created so that people like living on water and to use some of the water for other things? I know that's not going to solve things catastrophic event, right? And then that's a sensible question, but that's what I said.
You hadn't thought about that aspect.
We hadn't thought about that. I mean, it's classic.
Increasing the amount of riverfront in Brisbane.
Yeah. If we have enough money, we can dig a big hole. That's kind of the attitude.
Well, it's going to cost a lot of money anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that's big dollars that we're talking about, and we have problems with water. I mean, we've got shortages of oil,
Fresh water.
fresh water. Yeah. So the
That's
potential
the
to convert.
issue is fresh water.
Yeah. Well, we can do desalination.
Right.
We actually got our first desalination plant, which was big, and then actually test on credits in Australia. So that's really, is there. That's. I mean, we're talking a long time to build. We're talking a lot of money. We're talking about global shortages in construction materials.
So in a way, so we haven't thought about this particular aspect at all. But in some ways, that was actually the intent of the study, to kind of put the first order magnitude analysis out there and say, well, do we like that scenario?
Right, so there are all
And
these
then,
other
so that people start like a reaction and say, wait a minute, I don't like that scenario. Well then, but what else do I like, right?
Right, like costing out retreat.
Yeah, well, exactly. But this gives you this is the first step, and as we work through this, I think all of us looked at this and said, damn, this is a dumb idea, right? Pretty much. But having said that,
Yeah.
the first step in considering realistic alternatives is to say, okay, here's a baseline. Now you have a way of comparing, and especially if you get substantial melting of the terrestrial glaciers, you don't have a lot of time.
But actually, the other thing about what we've done is actually you're just talking about protecting ports. People are still living on the coast and saying, don't worry, they're going to build dikes and we'll be fine. So it's actually the reality check for the globe to actually say, this is not going to work. What you think is going to work, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that's where, I mean, Ben made the observation that, as great as democracies are, they're not equally good at dealing with these kinds of problems.
Right, and interestingly enough, one of the motivations we are looking at doing a substantial project in Asia, in China, in fact, and pardon? I'm not hopefully now, so I can't say. But when we asked the government who we're negotiating with about this problem, because they said, don't worry, we'll take care of it. And so part of another way of looking at this problem is we're asking, is this a promise that you can keep? They may have made the promise in good faith, it just may not be one that they can keep. So this is
For many years in China, they regular, I followed some studies. They have always had big debates over what's coastal zone. In the hunting maps and territorial sea. These basic issues. But that's another thing we'll take care of.
So here's another wild idea,
Okay.
is that just to actually produce, to produce the kinds of materials that you would need to So,
Cement?
so yeah, cement is one of the worst. So you gotta kind of, then
Too
start.
bad. You got
Right.
to
Right.
You know
Yes,
what?
consequences are, yeah.
You know what? That would be a great follow-on article.
Totally.
If you have a grad student who wants to
Yeah.
look at that, that would be great.
Yeah.
You know, this little corner of the world is already so stupefying that we're very well aware of all those other issues, and that's probably going to get a short paragraph at the end of the article. Right? It says, oh, by the way.
I just wanted to ask you, when you began this work, in planning to sell to students, did you consider yourself taking a sort of a conservative approach or a realistic approach, or moderate? And just trying to conservative in terms of the assumption that they make, how many cords, maybe 2 meters, did it bother you, or were the challenges of trying to work out the models, the procedures, the design, more important? Or were we constrained by something like discount rates, in the future? Any concern? Those thoughts that are
We were mostly worried at this stage about reasonable conceptual approach and method.
okay. Well, that's what I was trying to get.
That is transparent, people would follow, say, okay,
Reasonable conceptual approach to method does not involve worrying about whether you're conservative or you're
Oh, and from a design point of view, is this a conservative feature? No. No. In fact, these are, we sort of have been working with the concept that we call the minimum credible design.
Okay, that's right.
The minimum credible design.
The engineering theory.
That's right. That's the minimum credible design that an engineer would look at. Because what we didn't want was to propose something that any engineer would look at and just this out here. So that's crazy.